Hello, welcome to the third talk in the Asynchronous and Distributed Working series in association with Silicon Brighton and Brighton Java. So this is the third Wednesday of September and this is the third video that's come at you. 2 more Wednesdays remain and there'll be 2 more videos to come. And as with this video, as with the next ones, at the bottom of the video you can see that there's a form and you can vote for whatever the next topic is. So on that subject, this particular video, the votes tallied up from last time showed that you, the viewers, by a very long way actually, wanted to see a video on staying connected to people via deliberate communication. So what does this mean? One of the things that we've really noticed by not being in offices with each other is all of those spontaneous interactions that we have with those who sit around us or those that we pass whilst going to the kitchen, making a coffee, just haven't really happened, because you notice that when you're working remotely, you're typically only focused on the work that you're doing and those who are in that immediate connected sphere of who you're working with. So for example, your team or somebody that you're reviewing a pull request of, typically it's the work that drives that interaction. But the office drove other interactions, which I think many of us have sorely missed. And you'll see that office design over time has actually tried to create these spontaneous interactions. I was reading Creativity Inc., which is a book on the history of Pixar, which is great. I really recommend it. About a year ago I read that, and I always remember them talking about the architecture of their first office when they built their first campus for their staff. And very much the layout of that office was such so that regardless of where anybody was sitting, in any part of the building, there were particular circular routes that people were forced to go on in order to go to the bathroom or go to the kitchen, that would force people to bump into each other, because they really believed as part of their culture, and they probably still do, that these spontaneous interactions with people created the best ideas and made people feel happy in their day-to-day work. And I believe that also, having a multitude of people in which you can chat to is great. It just helps you in so many different ways. And that's what we've been missing. So over the pandemic period at Brandwatch, we've been thinking quite a lot about how we're able to recreate some of these things. Even though you can't recreate them fully, there still isn't anything that you can do programmatically or with your calendar that can make it feel like you've just bumped into someone in the corridor, but trying to fill in some of the gaps around the edges, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So this deliberate communication that I talked about, that phrase, I think was possibly coined by my colleague Hamish Morgan, because he wrote in our engineering handbook, which is our guide to how things get done in our department that everyone can see. He wrote a page on this deliberate communication subject, and we very much split it into 2 halves. There's a formal side of deliberate communication, but then there's also an informal side. And before we get into the details, the formal side is very much deliberately having regular communications with the people who are above or below and to the side of you in the org chart. So like your manager, your team, your peers, and so on. And making sure that those things are scheduled in, that you do them, and you do create the space. That's the formal side. There's also the informal side, which is like, how is it possible to try in some way to recreate some of that going to the kitchen for a coffee and bumping into someone and having a chat? And this is slightly more awkward and there isn't a perfect analogue. However, you can do some things that can make that possible. So we'll cover that today. First off, the formal stuff. So I do take for granted sometimes that at Brandwatch we've got a really good culture of communication and management and support and coaching and mentorship. So these are the things that we've already been doing pre-pandemic. So we've managed to carry them through as effectively video and asynchronous forms. But there are many workplaces that don't do these things, so I'm just going to touch upon them. One is with you and your manager, you should definitely be having a one-to-one meeting once a week, private meeting between both of you, where you can talk about what's on your mind, what you've got in progress, whether there's anything blocking you or worrying you, talk about your career progression. If you're not doing that already, definitely do that. Schedule it in. It's like fundamental stuff that I really, really believe is the cornerstone of having a great relationship with your manager and also a great psychologically safe environment at work. So do that. Many people do that already. There's also your team, so making sure that you do have regular time to talk to your team, and that naturally happens through your work. However, making sure that you've got asynchronous methods such as Slack channels, emailing lists, but also synchronous methods, so you do regularly get together once a day at a stand-up, which could be sync or async, but also booking in whatever ceremony meetings that you do around Scrum or Kanban or however you do your work. Those things are a way that you can stay connected, but just buffering them around the edges so there is a bit of time either end of those meetings to just ask how people are doing, see how they're getting on, rather than it just being a very regimented, let's get in, let's get on with it, let's go. It kind of takes the soul out of it. So that's the team. You've got your manager, you've got the team. But one part that's often ignored is your peers. So having regular time in with your peers really, really helps. Now, my own particular position, I'm a senior vice president, so my peers are the other VPs in the organisation. And I personally noticed that I did a really bad job of staying up to date with them. We're often working on quite different things at quite high levels of abstraction and strategic thinking. So I took for granted that they were there, but sort of always assumed that we were always thinking the same way and that we were catching up enough. But since the pandemic started, I've gone for monthly check-ins with my peers. So we book in an hour. There's absolutely no topic really that we bring to it other than just having a chat. And make sure that we sit down, that we cover off whatever's on our mind. We schedule up any actions if they're required. But really, in all honesty, those meetings with my peers are more just about information sharing, information gathering. But regardless of whether you're a manager or not, even if you're an IC, if you're a senior engineer, booking in time monthly with other senior engineers so you can find out what they're doing, talk about the latest things that you're building, think about the things that are coming up, if there's any new architecture you're thinking of working on soon. Super, super valuable, because all of these things are just sort of building out that connection, that sort of graph that you have in that organisation that builds up this support network around you and makes you feel like you definitely belong a lot more, even though you don't physically fit into some particular space in an office with people around you. It really helps, and it does require some effort, but it's really, really worth it. So another thing that's really important is mentorship, and what we did a couple of months ago at Brighton, which worked really well, was very simple mentorship schemes, sort of reinvigorate that whole kind of buddy system where we can find people who really want to be mentors and find people who are seeking mentorship and then link them together. So what we did was just a few columns in a spreadsheet. One of them was a person's name. The second column was whether they wanted to give mentorship or whether they wanted to receive mentorship. And then the other column was just what sort of thing was their skill set. So that could be Java, JavaScript, could be management, could be UX or so on. And then all we did was send an email around to the department to say, hey, we'd like to self-organise a mentorship scheme. We're obviously able to help support you and think about what you want to talk about, but to begin with, let's pair people up. So we got people to all fill in that spreadsheet, put down their name, put down whether they wanted to receive mentorship or wanted to give mentorship and what their skills were, gave about a week or so for that to fill up, and then went through and then just told people to go in, find people and link themselves up. So that's sort of a department-wide mentorship link-up scheme that didn't involve much more than an email and a spreadsheet, but that was really, really worthwhile. And we've now found that there's at least 30 to 40 people in our department who have entered into new mentorship relationships, often with people who are outside of their regular team, maybe across a different division of the department, which is great because not only does it mean that people are receiving mentorship and also given the ability to be a mentor, they're also learning about what else is going on in the department, which is helping them stay more connected. So that's the formal deliberate communication stuff. It is quality time with your manager once a week, and if you want to read more about one-to-ones and things to talk about, I've got all that on my website, also in my book. Making sure that you're spending time with your team, but you probably already are. Importantly, spending time with your peers, booking in time with your peers, and also having some kind of mentorship or buddy scheme, which is very easy to kick off, to link people together and help them learn, help them teach, but also learn about what else is going on. So that's the formal part. So now the informal part. Now, the informal, deliberate communication stuff, at least looking at Twitter, has kind of worn a bit thin. People are in enough video calls all day. They don't really want to get onto a fun video call and have like a virtual drink with people and maybe play a board game virtually. I mean, some of these things are the obvious things to try initially, but you know, there's only so many Zooms that I can do every day. So coming up with some different ways of having some informal deliberate communication is quite important, because it can't replace the in-person interactions for sure, but if they're done in a good way, they can supplement them. And here's some of the things that have worked for us. So one is trying to work out how you can get people connected via their interests. So just off the top of my head, some various different asynchronous sharing opportunities that we've had just on Slack are to find people who like, and these are just ones that I'm in, people who like cooking and baking, people who like exercising, people who are cat owners, dog owners, and the list goes on. We've created a whole bunch of channels, and many of them existed before the pandemic, where people come in and it's just really is just goofing off. You know, it's posting pictures of your dog doing something stupid, it's baking a cake and showing a picture of it, sharing recipes and so on, but making sure that there's lots of asynchronous ways in which people can connect with others based on their interests. Just bring another element to the distributed working situation that isn't just we are here to do our work and nothing else. Those are pretty fun. Another thing that we've been trying is, another interest is gaming. So we've been matchmaking people across the department, getting their gamer tags from whichever network they're on, whether it's Xbox, PlayStation, Switch and so on, and just creating a channel and a space in which people can arrange after work gaming sessions. That's worked pretty well, and I think lots of people who are outside the department have been joining in as well and just sort of building connections with each other. There is obviously the sort of virtual drinks, virtual quiz. I don't know, I think that's wearing thin a little bit now. Certainly once the workday is over, I don't want to spend another hour on another video call, but doing something fun this time. I think I'd rather, at that point, get away from the desk and go and do something at home instead. It's more interesting to me, at least. However, that kind of informal staying connected to your colleagues is really important. So some teams have booked out time in their morning so that you can have your sort of 11 o'clock coffee break by just hanging out on the video call. But the important thing is it's during the day, because fostering a bond with your colleagues is not something that has to wait until outside of work. If you cannot be bonding in person because you're not physically co-located, then the bonding part is your job. It's part of your job, and therefore you should do it on work time. So coffee break in the morning, 15 minutes, go on the Zoom, make a coffee, have a chat about anything and everything. And you can even open that up to other teams, people to hop in and say hi. That's worked pretty well. Something else that's worked pretty well is meeting up in person. Surprise, surprise. Now that the lockdown is easing slightly, although at the time that I'm recording this video, in the UK at least, the number of people in a group is going down from 30 to 6. You can still meet up with people outside of work, and some people have been doing that. We're fortunate in Brighton that we live by the sea, so there's lots of public places you can meet up where there is good ventilation and it's not too busy. So some teams have been booking out time in their week to go and actually physically meet up, go and have lunch on the beach, go for a walk together and have a meeting that way, go and swim in the sea, go for a bike ride, that kind of thing. And again, the important part here is that, I mean, I'm in a privileged position as a manager that I can sort of say that it's okay to happen. I'm not sure whether you have to convince your own manager or whoever leads your company to do so, but definitely meeting up in person on work time and it being okay to do so is a really great way of deliberately staying connected to other people. As soon as it starts to encroach into the evenings or your mornings or your spare time, I think that's just a big no-no, and that's really annoying. But being able to do so on work time, I think makes it a lot better. So I'd encourage you to encourage others that you work with to, instead of on a Friday afternoon, as you're sort of starting to get tired and the week's tailing off, not just to sort of sit around on Slack, but say, hey, why don't we, assuming you don't have to travel too far, book out a couple of hours on Friday afternoon and we all just go for a walk in the park, or maybe we meet up and do something fun outside of work, but on work time, because that's another way that you can still feel connected, you can still feel like you're socially active, but not have to sort of put in the extra work in order to do so. And that's something I'd really recommend. So, deliberate communication, in summary, is you mindfully doing activities with others to stay connected to them. And you've got the formal aspect, which is above, one-to-ones with your manager. You've got working with your team on a day-to-day basis, but making sure that you're able to talk about things that are not work as well. You've also got going sideways in the org chart by booking in regular meetings with your peers, whoever they are, and making sure that you stay connected to them. And again, you don't have to bring a particular agenda, you can just have a chat. And also, if you've got the ability to do so, you can set up a sort of a mentorship scheme very, very easily by pretty much an email and a spreadsheet, and connect people together and then help them form connections with people outside of their team, outside of their division, and maybe even outside of their department if you wanted to. And then there's all of the informal stuff. And informal stuff is, at least in my mind, it shouldn't be outside of work. I mean, some things belong outside of work, but ideally not outside of work. Make it part of work, because it is part of work to have good rapport with your colleagues. Try and get outside when you can. If you live locally, see if there's people you can go for a walk with, go to a park, go to a beach if you're lucky enough to have one. Additionally, form groups based on interests, so provide synchronous and asynchronous methods for people to connect on things in our lives that we all love, whether that's our pets, whether it's our children, whether it's video games, whether it's sport, exercise. On the exercise topic, something fun that we're doing at the moment is that we have an office in Boston, we have an office in Brighton in the UK, and we measured the distance between the two places, and then we had a spreadsheet where we were encouraging everybody to do exercise and record either how long they've been working out, and that translates into some number of miles, or how far they've cycled or walked or run, and then we're keeping track of that as the month goes on and trying to see whether all of us can collectively go the distance from Brighton to Boston. And I think we're almost tracking. Might need to go for a slightly longer run later so we can catch up, or maybe get on a bike instead because that'd be more efficient. Anyway, but there's lots of ways in which you can sort of encourage lots of people who don't necessarily talk to each other to connect around some reason, share information, share what they're doing, and have a bit of fun when they do so. On work time. So, Q&A. We had some questions. First question is, how do I get good at text-based communication? Am I doing it right? I mean, I don't know whether you're doing it right. That's literally the only thing you wrote, so I mean, that came across well. Getting good at text-based communication is tricky, I think, because it not only relies on you getting better yourself, but also having other people who are good at it that you can learn from while you're talking. But good writing really does take practice, especially if you've previously worked in a place that has been very synchronous, very in-person, very sort of meeting-based and vocal-led. Reverting back to a lot more writing can be really tricky, because some of us maybe haven't written a lot since even school, you know. So what you have to do is realise it doesn't come naturally to everybody. It is a skill. It doesn't matter if you're not good at it. You know, you can get better with practice. So the key is finding areas in which you can practice. So, I mean, I know, for example, me, I write a lot. I've written a book, I write a blog. I actually prefer writing to speaking a lot of the time. So I'm always writing, and if I think about a regular day at work, I'm probably writing for 4 hours of it. So I'm getting plenty of practice. So if you're not, you need to find ways to get that practice in. Mindfully think that every communication that you do, whether it's on Slack or email or whatever, is actually an opportunity to practice your writing. So if you slow down and if you think about how you can compose your messages in the most concise way possible, using some better language than you usually do, you know, you go and look up some examples from a thesaurus of like better words that you can use to communicate. All these things, like, use it as a training opportunity every time you interact with somebody. That can work. Also, if you can't get enough time at work to practice, then there are other things you can do. More generally, if you'd like to improve at writing, some are fun. You know, you could go and spend time every evening posting on Reddit if you really want to, and just compose your writing really well. You know, that gives you the primer to do your writing. You could even start your own blog privately. You know, you don't have to tell anyone where the URL is, and write about something you're passionate about. That's a good way of practicing writing and then you read it back the next day and see what you think. And every time you do so, you improve. It's like programming. And you could even keep a journal for yourself, a completely private journal, where just at the end of every single day, you just summarize what you've been up to, maybe what you'd like to focus on tomorrow, and just write to yourself effectively. But it's like a muscle. It's like programming. You just have to keep doing it every day and you'll get better. So look for opportunities. And if you can't find any opportunities, then create the opportunities to write more. And with time, you'll get a lot better. Okay, second question. So I'm keen to gauge your thoughts on team members who don't want to turn their cameras on during video calls. Okay, so I guess I don't know the context of that question, but maybe we could look at it from two aspects. If it's because people are uncomfortable to do so, then definitely talk to them and find out why. I know that some people who have loads of meetings, being on video for all of them is just exhausting, especially if they're maybe a participant that's mostly going to be in a sort of a more passive listening role in a meeting rather than a contributing role. I think that's fine. But I think the important bit is the declaration that they're going to be in that situation. If they're going to join the call and be like, hey, I'm mostly listening to this one, so I'm going to turn my video off so I can listen and also do a bit of work at the same time. Cool, like not a problem. Like that's absolutely fine. I guess the other side, if the context of your question is they're team members who are contributing to meetings who feel that they're almost hiding in some way because they're maybe not speaking much or they're not turning their video on and they're not saying why, then I'd see that as maybe a bit of a cause for concern, and maybe it's time to try and talk to them, try and find out why. There may be very valid reasons that maybe they've got their kids running around them, maybe they've not got a particularly good setup around them where they're working at home and they don't really want to show you it on video. Maybe they've just had a bad night's sleep and they've not had a chance to sort of wake up properly and get dressed properly and so on. Anyway, regardless, maybe it's a slight red flag as to their own personal condition at that time. Maybe they are feeling down or vulnerable, or maybe they don't want to show themselves for some reason. I think it's time to talk to them and find out what's going on. And in the midst of understanding them and hearing them out and finding out why they're like that, then you can then start to turn the conversation to, it would be nice if they could turn the video on, just because it makes it easier for everybody else to really engage with them. But I think rather than just sort of leading with you need to turn it on, often there's a reason. So I think it's working with them or working with their manager to work with them to try and find out what's going on and go from there. Okay, the last question is, I'd like to know more on asynchronous alternatives to commonly synchronous meetings. For example, how do you do planning if not everyone is present? I assume that's kind of like agile planning with like planning poker and so on. Also, syncing asynchronous work, getting people to do asynchronous tasks when they're focused on their own work. I try to enforce the rule that when you start the day or come back from lunch, you complete your outstanding async tasks, but found it hard to push on to others who had a more gradual start to working sessions. Okay, there's a few things there. I guess we'll start with the planning one. So doing some things asynchronously is actually quite hard. I think that there are some things where, if it is possible, definitely do all get together, even if it's for a very brief time, to do that particular activity. Like a synchronous session of planning and estimating work is just going to be like way easier than doing asynchronously. So I try that to begin with. If you absolutely cannot do it synchronously because of perhaps time zones or people's commitments or calendars or so on, then I did a little bit of research. There are some tools out there. There's one called Pokrex or Pokrex, Pokrex.com, which is a planning poker estimation tool which does have an asynchronous mode. I didn't actually use it, but I found some people reviewing it on Reddit saying that it worked for that reason. You can sort of pre-submit all of your estimates for any given story, and then it will reveal them at the time that you're going through the motions. So that could work, but then obviously if that person's there and there's a disagreement in the estimates, then you can't really work it out ahead of time, but it's something. So that bit I'd say, yeah, there's some stuff that really is just easier synchronously, and just try and find the time. If not, maybe there's some tooling. The bit about maybe some frustrations about getting other people to do their asynchronous work, and maybe not paying any attention to it, maybe focusing on their own. That's an interesting one. I think I've found that the easiest way to improve that situation is trying to focus not so much on, hey, there's this other stuff you need to be doing and you're not doing it, but try and lead and sort of coach a mindset of this isn't just more work you have to do. Actually, the asynchronous stuff, especially reviewing pull requests, is a high leverage activity, and getting people to think about the impact and the sort of the leverage of a thing that they do. And leverage is a very sort of a term like synergy, you know, it's a silly term. But for example, if I was to come back from my lunch break and just get on with my own thing, then actually there could be 2 other people in the team who are blocked on a pull request that I need to review. So if I'm thinking about the impact of my own activity in that moment, the highest impact and the highest leverage thing I could do would be to do that asynchronous work and to review their pull request, to get that moving, get it merged and so on, and then go back to my own. So getting people to think about the team as a whole rather than just them as individuals, I think coaching that mindset will begin to improve the situation that you just talked about. So maybe give that a go. Sort of think about how the interdependencies between people asynchronously, if they're resolved quickly, will result in a higher output for the whole team with time. And actually that's where individuals should be focusing. Give that a go and see what happens. Cool, so that's it. That is the 3rd video. Thanks for watching. You can vote for the topic of the next video. The form is below, it's down there. Click on it and see what you'd like to have a video on next. It's been fun to spend this time with you, it's been fun to answer the questions, and see you again next week for more fun. Until then.